Hey everybody, Matt from 90th percentile.ca here. For access to more study notes, practice questions, mock exams, and end of chapter question videos, visit 90th percentile.ca and sign up for your free trial today. Link below in the description. This learning module is working capital and liquidity. So this is an important topic not only in the curriculum but in the business world as well. All companies, no matter what you do, need to be able to successfully manage their working capital and liquidity in order to, well, have cash on hand to actually run their business, right? So we're going to talk about a couple different approaches that companies can take to managing their working capital, those being an aggressive approach, conservative approach, or a moderate approach. And the key difference between these, which we'll get into later, is mainly related to how much cash they're actually holding on hand at a given time versus how much they are reinvesting into the business. So, it's obviously going to have some implications for shareholder returns and risk and, where they're getting their financing from. But we'll dive into it in a little bit. And then finally, we'll also be talking about how firms can manage working capital items and financing to, come up with a successful working capital structure. And we can talk about some terms um, to accounts receivable that might change how much cash companies have on hand, whether you're a company or whether you're a customer or a supplier. So AR for customers, AP for suppliers. We'll also talk about inventory management and how that will impact how much cash you have on hand. And we'll also be talking about external financing. So whether it's short-term financing or long-term financing, we'll kind of link this back to the approaches here. Um, and one of the key points to remember here is that typically best practice for the most part is to match the duration of your assets with the duration of your liabilities. So if you have, like a 1 month expansion project and you need financing for it, you're not going to take out like a 30-year loan to do that. So external financing is a big part of managing working capital when you don't have enough cash from ops to fund your operations, or the timing of this cash from ops doesn't exactly match up on a day-to-day basis. So that's where the external financing comes in. But like I said, we're going to jump into it. So let's just go right in. Company has arranged a 20 million line of credit with a bank, allowing the company the flexibility to borrow and repay any amount of the funds as long as the balance does not exceed the line of credit. These arrangements are called convertibles. Note these are, convertible debt that can be converted into common equity. So this is just a loan from a bank. Factoring, note factoring is related to selling a company selling its accounts receivable at a discount. Um, Typically, I mean, in general, this is done when companies are experiencing working capital issues, so they don't really have the liquidity to fund their operations until their customers actually pay their accounts receivable. Um, so there's something to note there. And we're left with C, revolvers, which is exactly what this line of credit is. It's essentially a revolving loan where even though they have a 20 mil limit, so if here's 0, here's 20, the company can take out like 10, it could repay some, not back down to 5, and go back up to like 15, but they only have the limit up to 20 mil. Um, and they can, like I said, repay it or issue more up to their limit at any time, repay it, and the interest will accrue typically based on their beginning of month balance. The SOA company needs to raise 75 mil in local currency for substantial new investments next year. Specific details, all in local currency, are as follows. Investments of 10 mil in receivables, 15 in inventory, fixed capital investment of 50 mil, including 10 million to replace depreciated equipment, so that's maintenance capex, and 40 mil of net new investments, so expansion capex. Um, so once again, they're providing, I guess, a bit more detail than necessary, but we can see the 50 plus the 10 is 60 plus 15 is 75. So here's a 75 mil investment that we talked about up here. Um, and here's actually like it's a long question, so I would just look at what we're trying to do at the bottom of the question. So we're trying to calculate how much additional financing the company needs. So right here we have some cash from ops, and then there's going to be some difference, or I guess there's an option to repurchase. But there's going to be some difference between the 75 mil that they need and what they're actually generating. So we can kind of create a really simple cash flow statement. So we have net income 30. So I'm going to put plus minus for the sources. So this is a source of 30 mil. Dividend payments will be 12. So dividend cash outflow of 12 mil. Depreciation charges will be 10. So we're going to add that back. It's non-cash, so it's a source of cash of 10 mil. Short-term financing from accounts payable of 6 million is expected. Okay, so I thought there was going to maybe be like a change year over year in accounts payable, but there's not. So AP is just a straight up 6 mil source of cash. Firm will use receivables as collateral for an 8 million loan. So we have another loan of 8 mil. And then we have 14 mil in a short-term note to a bank. So let's put short-term note is plus what, 14 mil. Any additional external financing needed can be raised from an increase in long-term bonds. If additional financing is not needed, any excess funds will be used to repurchase common shares. Okay, so basically all we need to do is sum up all of this stuff and see whether or not there's a difference between 75 and how much we need to issue in the event that we're short, or how much we can use to repurchase shares in the event that this is greater than how much we actually need. So we have, we got 30 minus 12. 30 minus 12 plus 10 plus 6 plus 8 plus 14 is 56. So we're generating 56 mil in cash from ops, but we need 75 mil for the investments. And this isn't even assuming like a working capital buffer. Like a lot of companies will have, once again, outside the scope of the question, but a lot of companies will have like a working capital buffer. They set like a lower limit on how much, cash or marketable securities they have on hand. But here we're just assuming like we're spending every single penny on this that we have on our books to these investments. So we can see the 75 minus the 56 is what? 19. So our answer is A. So we have a corporation here, and the CFO has decided to pursue a moderate approach to funding the firm's working capital. And which of the following methods would best fit that approach? Okay, so there's three main approaches we can take to managing your working capital. The first is the conservative approach, where companies will have more cash on hand in working capital. So they'll have more cash in, literally cash, more cash in inventory, more cash in accounts receivable, more in accounts payable, etc. And this provides some more short-term flexibility, because if anything comes up in the short term, they have cash on hand to deal with it. On the opposite end of the spectrum, we have an aggressive approach, where a company holds the least amount of cash possible in working capital. So like less cash on hand, less inventory, less accounts receivable, less AP. And the whole idea here is that the company reinvests everything right away in hopes of higher returns. So, I guess an example of this could be just-in-time inventory, where companies, especially car manufacturers, this has gotten more popular recently, where they don't, necessarily have all the parts on hand in order to build a specific car, but once the car is ordered, they're able to get that, those different parts quickly and build the cars depending on demand. So they, don't have as many finished cars in their inventory in the event that it doesn't meet demand and they're not bought. And then somewhere in the middle is the moderate approach. So there's not like a, real definition here. It's just somewhere in the middle of these two. So based on that, what's the answer going to be? So which of the following methods is the moderate approach? So A, finance permanent and variable current assets with long-term financing. No. So this would be an aggressive approach, where like in the aggressive approach, a function of not having more cash or having less cash in working capital is having a lot of long-term debt. So they're using long-term debt as leverage to magnify their equity returns, right? Whereas like a moderate approach takes more of it's called asset liability management approach, where they try to match their assets. Like if they're engaging in an expansion project, they'll match the expected life of their expansion with a, a debt instrument of similar terms. So let's say there's like a plant that they're building and it's, going to be good for 10 years and they'll take out a 10-year loan to match it. And that, like the whole idea on that is that there's less interest rate risk versus, let's say it was like a 5-year project and you get a 30-year loan. Well, then for the remaining 25 years, after the first 5 years, who knows where interest rates are going to go? Who knows if if you're generating a lot of cash from the investment still, because there's a lot of stuff that can go wrong. So matching the duration or estimated life of your assets with your liabilities is more of a moderate approach. And then if we're here, finance permanent and variable current assets with short-term financing, no, it's kind of a conservative approach as well. So once again, short-term financing can be like short-term notes. It could, you can even stretch that definition to include like accounts payable, stuff like that. But this is more of a conservative approach, whereas C is going to be financing permanent current assets with long-term financing and variable current assets with short-term financing, right? So that's exactly what I said. Permanent assets, so long life with long-term financing, and then variable current assets, so shorter life with shorter term financing. A company increasing its credit terms for customers from 110 net 30 to 110 net 60 will most likely experience. Well, what are they going to experience? So, um, really quickly, this convention here is kind of like a shortcut that people use to define AR terms. The 110 means that customers will receive a 1% discount on their payment if they pay it within 10 days. But then net 30 just means that the remaining amount or their full amount is due in 30 days. So changing it from 110 net 30 to 110 net 60, what's going to happen? Well, there's no like increased incentive here for them to pay early, right? Like they still have the 110, so 1% discount in 10 days, but now they can also extend it out to 60 days for the remaining balance or the full amount. So like there's no incentive for customers to really pay early. It's all up to chance. Like of course some customers might. I don't know. It just depends on their preference. But if someone's says you can pay them now or you can pay them in 60 days, what are you going to do? Probably pay them in 60 days. So what's going to happen is we're going to have an increase in the average collection period, which is your AR days outstanding. Paloma Villarreal has received 3 suggestions from her staff about how to address her firm's liquidity problems. So she has 3 suggestions. One, reduce the firm's inventory turnover rate. Reduce the average collection period on accounts receivable. Accelerate the payments on accounts payable by paying invoices before their due dates. Which suggestion should the company employ to improve the firm's liquidity position? So we want to improve the liquidity position. So we want to have more cash on hand, more cash and working capital. So for suggestion one, inventory turnover rate, we want to reduce it. Well, what's the inventory turnover rate? It's COGS over your average inventory. So if we're reducing this, we're either increasing our inventory on hand, which means we have to pay more cash to have that inventory, or we're reducing COGS, which means that we're not selling as much because we're not like the COGS is recognized when we actually sell something. So this would actually worsen our position and make us have less cash on hand. Two, reduce the average collection period on accounts receivable. This is going to be it, right? So if customers are paying in 60 days traditionally, but you speed it up such that they're paying in 30 days, there's going to be more cash coming in this interim period. So you're going to have more cash on your books. And this is, kind of goes back to like the way I think of it is when we're creating the cash from operations section on the cash flow statement, a decrease in an asset is a source of cash. So like if you're decreasing your AR outstanding, that means you received the cash. If you're decreasing your inventory on hand, that means you sold it and you have more cash, right? So our answer is going to be B. We can look at 3 as well though. So accelerating payments on accounts payable by paying invoices before their due dates. If, kind of goes back to what I said earlier, right? If you can pay a company now or in 60 days, when would you do it? Well, if you pay them in 60 days, you're going to have more cash on hand for that 60 days. There could be like a weird instance where you get like a significant discount if you're paying your accounts payable really early. And then you would have to run some numbers and figure out whether or not your net cash position improves versus these alternatives. But that's, obviously outside of the scope of this question, so our answer is B. Selected liquidity ratios for three firms in the leisure products industry are given in the table below. The most recent fiscal year ratio is shown along with the average of the previous 5 years. Relative to its peers and relative to its own prior performance, which company is in the most liquid position? So relative to its peers and its own prior performance. So liquidity ratios, they're already calculated for us, which is nice. So we're talking current ratio, quick ratio, cash ratio, which of course all of these are like the denominator would be your current liabilities. But the numerator is a bit different depending on which one. Current ratios are total current assets. Quick ratio would be um, your cash plus marketable securities plus inventory plus AR. And then the cash ratio is going to take out the inventory and AR and just be cash and marketable securities. But anyway, whole point of this question, obviously the higher the ratio, the better, because it indicates a more liquid company. So the first thing we can do is just look at the peer analysis. So we have most recent 5-year average. This is for company H, and then company J, company S. So most recent current ratio, company H versus company J, higher versus company S. This is higher as well, 5-year average. Company H is not higher. So let's just do this actually. Let's circle the highest one. So company H, most recent, is the highest. 5-year average. Company J is the highest. Quick ratio, company H is the highest. 5-year average, company H is the highest as well. Cash ratio, for the most recent, company H is the highest, and 5-year average, company J is the highest. So here there's a bit of, when you're giving some conflicting data in terms of who's more liquid based on some ratios, there is a bit of judgment involved, right? Like it's not an exact science, but here, like we said, we're comparing it relative to peers and its own prior performance. So the most liquid position right now in most recent year is company H, so I'm obviously going to lean towards company H. But we also have to check if it's more liquid relative to its 5-year averages, its historical position, right? So current ratio is greater now than the 5-year average. Quick ratio is greater now than the 5-year average, and the cash ratio is also greater. So company H is going to be our answer. Company J improved as well. Like if you're looking at its most recent versus the 5-year average, improved here, improved here, improved here. But we're asked about the most liquid position. That kind of implies currently. So I'm going to go with company H, given that we circled all three of these for the most recent year. Which of the following are considered internal sources of financing for companies' working capital management? So internal sources are generated from cash from ops. And we're not worried about any external financing like loans or equity or whatever. So right away we can cross out committed and uncommitted lines of credit. That's not an internal source. So we're left with accounts receivable and inventory and accounts payable and accruals. Answer is going to be accounts payable and accruals. Of course, like the easiest way to think of this is that whenever you're paying a supplier and they just give you the product or service without you having to pay immediately, that's a source of cash, right? Because you're getting the good or service and you don't have to pay. AR and inventory are typically considered like uses of cash, especially when like at inception, because you have to like pay for your inventory. On accounts receivable, your customer's delaying its payment, so it's a use, like you're using your cash either to purchase the inventory or deliver the service or product. Of course, when these balance sheet items change over time, like a decrease in these over time would be a source of cash. But at inception and generally, accounts payable and accruals are a source of internal financing.